Welcome to Behavioral Grooves, the podcast that explores human behavior through a behavioral science lens. I'm Kurt Nelson.
And I'm Tim Houlihan. We like to explore science, stories, and secrets of human behavior with leading authors, researchers, and practitioners. We do this through relaxed and raw interviews to deliver big ideas you can use in your work and home life.
In this episode, we explore some very fundamental aspects of human nature through the lens of a researcher whose life's work, personal humility, and growth mindset are absolutely inspirational.
I couldn't agree more, Kurt. Dolly Chugh is an associate professor and social psychologist at New York University's Stern School of Business. Her research focuses on the psychology of good people, and she has been published in many top managerial and academic publications. Dolly teaches leadership, management, and negotiations to MBA students and runs a book club with incarcerated students through the NYU Prison Education Program.
Dolly's research spans decades, and a lot of it is compiled in her fantastic new book, The Person You Mean to Be. And we spent some time highlighting some of the key points she makes in the book, but she always brought the conversation back to practical ways we can all do a little bit better, how we can be a little more intentional in our lives. And as Dolly says, try to be more goodish instead of just trying to be good.
Yeah, and we want to do a quick shout out here to Daniel and Louise at Orange Wall, who partner with us on editing our episodes. They're just getting started and they're doing a great job. We really appreciate their hard work and effort that they're putting into each episode of Behavioral Grooves.
Yes, thank you, Daniel and Louise. And we also want to thank those of you who are writing reviews or leaving us quick ratings on the pod service that you listen to. It turns out that ratings and reviews go a long way in helping new listeners find us. So if you like this episode, let someone know. We would really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, so with that, we invite you to sit back and relax with a nice warm cup of goodish brew and enjoy our conversation with Dolly Chugh. Dolly Chugh, welcome to Behavioral Grooves.
Thank you for having me. This is exciting.
Hey, we got through the tech gremlins, and now we get to start with a speed round. So Tim is going to start with our speed round questions.
I am. So, Dolly, which would you prefer? Dinner with your favorite musician or favorite athlete?
Ooh, athlete.
Okay.
Ooh.
Anybody come to mind?
So many. I am a former athlete. And I am a big sports fan, but Serena Williams was the first one that came to mind. But there's so many. Colin Kaepernick would be the other one.
Oh, wow. That would be fantastic. Yeah, both of those. Yeah. You could have a nice group dinner. Like you have yeah, there you go. You get Serena and Colin, and that would be nice. There you go. All right.
Yes.
This is easy question. Second one. Coffee or tea?
Tea.
Tea. Okay.
Bravo. You're in our camp on that one, by the way.
If you had asked me a few years ago, I would have said Diet Coke.
That's okay.
It's okay. That's okay. Now. You can't see that Tim and I probably both have a Coke Zero sitting on our desk right now.
Okay, so third question: beach vacation or mountain vacation?
Any vacation, but mountain sounds awesome.
Okay.
All right. Final speed round question, Dolly. Mm-hmm. Should I try to be good or goodish?
Ooh, look at you. Nice. Well done. You should try to be goodish because trying to be good is getting in the way of you being better.
Oh, all right. So which is a main concept in your book. Why don't you tell people first a little bit about the difference between good and goodish, and then let's go, we'll do some backstory on what got you interested in writing this book. But let's talk about good and goodish first.
Awesome. I love that format, by the way. I think I'm going to steal that at my teaching, the little speed questions.
do it, please.
Totally. Before you know it, you're like in it.
Lift it. Yeah.
I will. So you've helped us sort of get right to the heart of my book, which is this notion that there's a lot of data that suggests many people care about feeling like a good person and being a good person. That's called moral identity. And the research is really robust that while we may define good person differently, and we do, there's lots of different ways people think about what is being a good person. whatever that is for you, you do care about that identity. And that seems like a robust way of being for individuals and societies. But the challenge that I'm really interested in is that once we start holding tightly to that identity, and let's take it into the domain of things like sexism and racism and homophobia and ableism and ageism, all the isms and obias. And a lot of us have a belief that like, we don't want to be those things. We want to not be racist, not be sexist. And being a good person means not being those things.
Mm.
And that gets us into a little bit of a sticky situation because we have lots of insight into how the human mind works. The last 50 years of cognitive psychology and social psychology and neuropsychology makes it very clear. 3 Nobel Prizes makes it very clear that the human mind does a lot of its work on autopilot, and it uses a lot of shortcuts and heuristics. And those shortcuts work really well lots of times, but sometimes these shortcuts are like little stereotypes or little rules of thumb that are wrong, they're not correct. And they lead to things like unconscious bias. They lead to us making really poor choices. And when that happens, our good person identity is suddenly, at a juxtaposition with the fact that I have just in class used a term that's inappropriate, or that I'm saying class because I'm a professor, or I've confused 2 Black students for each other who look nothing alike in class in front of everybody, or I've assigned a reading and had a reading that I've assigned 1 million times, quite frankly, and read 1 million times, and have a student confront me saying it's a sexist reading, and I get very defensive, and then I look at it at the page they're pointing to, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's such a sexist reading. How did I never notice that?
Wow.
So and these I'm just rattling off like a few recent examples, and so my good person identity in that moment is really like, if it's brittle, if I'm holding it very tightly, it's going to reject those moments. I'm not going to learn from those moments. I'm not going to accept that feedback. I'm not going to accept accountability in front of my students. I'm going to deflect and reject and deny and defend. And our minds are really good at that. And so what I've been pushing for is, rather than trying to be a good person, we want to try to be goodish people. And by goodish, I mean a higher standard than good person, not a lower standard. It's not settling for or good enough. It's using Carol Dweck's research on growth mindsets and fixed mindsets to say good person is this brittle fixed mindset where I'm supposed to just know it. And if I don't know it, I'm going to just move away from it and pull away from it. In a growth mindset, no matter where I am, whether I'm sort of a beginner or advanced, a good person, I'm always getting better. I'm always growing. Therefore, those moments when I'm confronted by that student, or I embarrass myself, or I say something wrong, are not moments for me to deflect and reject. They're moments for me, to be mortified, no doubt, to be remorseful for harm I've done, but to grow. And that's what the data actually says, that when you're in that growth mindset, or what I call being goodish, in those moments, your neuroscience data says we actually see our minds flooding attention towards the mistake so that we can grow and learn from it. And that's what I think is so powerful about being a goodish person, is you're better than you were last week, last month, last year.
Why aren't we already doing this? Like, this just seems like such a great idea. Why aren't we really? Like, why is it so? And I feel I'm going to make a pejorative statement here, but why does it seem so difficult to do?
Yeah, no, and I relate to it. It's difficult, I think, for all of us. There's something. I use this term psychological literacy. I don't think we have a lot of psychological literacy about how our mind works, and in fact, how similar the functioning of our ethical mind or our social mind is to the rest of our mind. So, Herb Simon won the Nobel Prize for his work on bounded rationality. And the insight there was that a human mind has limited computing power and processing speed and storage capacity. And that sort of intuitively makes sense, especially now that we all live with our devices and computers and have gotten very literate in those features. But even back then, it resonated. And so this notion of bounded rationality allowed us to see the human mind has systematic constraints on the quality of its decision making because it will rely on these shortcuts. Somehow that mind, which, it's when we think about that kind of decision making, we're thinking about, should we launch this product, or, should we budget money for this or that, or should we buy this product? It's the exact same mind. It's literally the same mind that's being used to decide who should I hire, or was that, did I just witness some unethical behavior? Was I a bystander, or am I telling a joke that is pejorative to a community of people? It's exact same mind. So if our mind is subject to bounded rationality and these systematic constraints on the quality of its decision making, why wouldn't it also be subject to systematic constraints on the quality of our ethical decision making? And that's the work that I've done with Max Bazerman, who I know you know, and Mahzreen Banaji and Molly Kern, is on bounded ethicality. And we're really, talk about just as a spinoff. This is like Joni Loves Chachi off of Happy Days. Like we're taking the same thing. We're just, but it's better than Joni Loves Chachi was.
Thank goodness.
And again, for listeners, that was a 70s show. So if you're under 30, go back and look. I'm sure there's old YouTubes of it. But
we'll put notes in the show notes.
We'll have to use all the Grey's Anatomy spinoffs to differentiate by age. Yeah, so bounded ethicality is really the exact same idea. And I think, to answer your question, I don't think we get that. I don't think our psychological literacy, our knowledge about how the human mind works, it's growing. I think it's grown so much even in the last 10 years, maybe because of there's so many popularizations. Like your podcast is a great example of where you're really translating and popularizing behavioral science in a way that makes it accessible. But I think that's the barrier right now.
So is there a role for psychological literature to be introduced into our educational system at an earlier age? Because right now it is one of those things. Who did we talk to, Tim, who was saying, how many geography teachers are there versus in geography classes versus psychology classes?
That was Steve Martin and Nuala Walsh.
Yeah. It was an interesting, and not to say anything bad about geography teachers, but this idea that we just have not kept up with the advances that have been made in this realm. And is this something that can be taught? From your perspective?
Absolutely. It's so absolutely can be taught. And I'm embarrassed that I never thought of that until you just said it. Like, that's true. I have 2 teenagers. Why? Yeah, you're right. Like that's it's quite genius, actually. And I think it shows up at the highest levels. Like right now in this terrible pandemic, we need the biologists and the chemists and the doctors, and we need all those researchers, but we seem to have not put social scientists at the forefront of the behavioral change that is so necessary for us to get past this pandemic. And, you've often heard, I once submitted a paper, I can't remember what journal it was, but they had a special issue where the whole premise of your submission was, what if instead of the president having a council, this is in the United States, a council of economic advisors, they had a council of psychological advisors?
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
And isn't it strange that we don't? When you think about it. So I think it's at every level. You're helping me think about, why aren't we building this literacy young? And I think it shows up when we get to our most consequential decision makers.
And I think there's a really interesting point that you bring up there is, in this current pandemic that we have done some fantastic things in developing vaccines as quickly as we have, and identifying how, the coronavirus transfers.
Yes.
Where we have fallen short to a certain degree is in the behavioral change that needs to happen, at least particularly, when we don't have a vaccine that is fully out there within the world, or even getting that vaccine to be taken because people are afraid of it. So, yeah, I think that's a really great insight.
Yeah, and I know, I believe you've spoken or you know of Katie Milkman, and she and others are doing such important work in that realm. The study of, for example, norms, how norms shape behaviors in ways that we don't expect, the study of influence and persuasion, the study of habit change, like all of these. There's so much research on these topics that's very relevant.
Yeah, Katie, they just released a recent brand new research on vaccines. It was a flu vaccine, but text messaging and how different text messages impact uptake of flu vaccine, which again, we need to have more of that, and that needs to get transferred down into, policy and various different pieces of that. Okay, we digress. We always digress. This is how we go.
I wanted to, if we could, talk a little bit more about the book, because I've been reading the past few years a lot more about racism. And Robin DiAngelo's book, White Fragility, I thought was really nice. But what you do in The Person You Mean to Be is you walk through the headwinds and tailwinds story of this woman, this character you call Colleen. And you talk about she's a white woman, and maybe you talk about, well, what was her life like? How did she come to where she is? And what would her life have been, and how would it have been different if she had not been white? And so I was wondering, would you be kind enough just to walk through this particular story? Because I found it really meaningful to the way that you use the headwinds and tailwinds kind of concept about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And I'll share two little sort of backstage nuggets on that before I walk you through. One is
Please do. Yes.
Yeah, I love the backstage nuggets. One is that is the chapter in the book that I get asked about the most and gets the most reader response. And two, that is the chapter that wasn't supposed to be in the book, that was a late add to the book. And after I walk you through it, I think it'll be apparent why it was a late add. It was my own limited understanding of these issues that sort of, initially I didn't see the need for it. So what the chapter does is try to bridge between what I am trained in, which is thinking about individuals. And I'm trained as a social psychologist. And so we think about individuals and the effect their situations have on them, or the effect other people and teams have on individuals and sort of within the individual mind. And so unconscious bias or implicit bias, which was very central to my training in my PhD program, is a big part of that field. And I set out to write a book that was largely centered on the psychology of good people and the ways in which we sometimes, it's back to how we think of good people. We aren't sort of living up to our image of ourselves as good people, and unconscious bias is one way that happens. And so that's what I set out to write this book about. And I got to be kind of a amateur journalist and interview like 40 people for the book to get those juicy real world stories, and just hear about how do real people in real situations grapple with their own mistakes and their own learnings in these spaces. And as I was doing those interviews, I was maybe like, I want to say, at least 10 or 12, maybe 15 interviews in, and people kept bringing up this word systemic. And then, I kind of know, I know what that, it sounds like system. I know what it means, but I didn't understand why they kept bringing it up. Because here I am, like, social psychologist. I think about individuals and I think about what's going on in your mind. Why do they keep talking about systems? What does that have to do with it? And I finally, it came up enough that I felt like I needed to sort of, do one of those, like, pretend you know what it is, but then go spend a day Googling it. So you can I keep nodding like I know what that means. But maybe
that's every day for me.
Right? What can we do before Google? Yeah. So I did that. I kind of did this like tangential deep dive, and suddenly, like, boom, the light bulb that others were seeing that I wasn't went off, which is these two things are really connected. What's happening with the individual and what's happening in systems and sort of more broadly. And what a big thing that helped me understand that, and then I promise I will get to Colleen, was the writing of Debbie Irving, who writes about headwinds and tailwinds. And that that is the metaphor that helps explain systems. And the key in that metaphor is, let's say you were to go for a walk or a run or a bike ride, and you're like, I'm going to go down to the fire hydrant that's at the end of that street, and then I'm going to U-turn back home. And on your way there, the wind's at your back, and you feel like, ooh, this no carb thing's working. I'm cranking, I've got this. And then you U-turn on your way back, the wind's in your face, and suddenly you're struggling to keep going, or you're struggling to keep your speed, or you're struggling to keep your motivation. And what's interesting is when you were on your way out with that tailwind, you didn't feel that the system was sort of, working for you. You felt like you were doing it. And then on your way back, when the headwind was against you, you could feel it. It was far more visible. And if somebody were looking out the window, they probably, when they saw you struggling, wouldn't have realized it was because of the headwind. They would just be like, Dolly doesn't seem to be much of a runner. She doesn't seem too motivated, or, I guess she comes from a community that doesn't value running, that kind of thing. And so this suddenly clarified for me what we mean by systems and why it connects to things like unconscious biases, that the two things are related. When I'm forming unconscious biases in my mind, I'm starting to associate Black people and less education. I'm doing it because there's systems around me that have led to Black people having less education in the United States. But I'm seeing it through the eyes of just like it's forming these individual associations in my mind, and I'm not noticing the systems that are causing it. So I'm starting to make these individual level attributions, or these community level attributions. And so in that chapter, I tried to explain to myself, quite frankly, how this all worked. And I used, it's the only chapter where I don't use people's real names. And this was at the request of the 3 people I interviewed in that chapter, where I took 3 individuals, all of whom had kind of a similar, they were all 3 white, and all 3 had a father or a grandfather that served in World War II. And as a veteran, had the benefits of the GI Bill. The GI Bill, as some of us might remember learning in history class, allowed veterans, when they came back from World War II, to buy a home at a zero or low cost mortgage and to go to college for free. And we often hear that it led to the rise of the middle class, the rise of the suburb in America, a huge sort of boost in our sort of economic prosperity as a country. And all of that is true, except it turns out that the way the law was structured and implemented, it essentially excluded Black veterans. And we had many, many Black veterans in World War II. And so white veterans saw this huge spike in homeownership. White veterans saw this huge spike in college attendance. And, what if you want to predict whether someone's going to go to college or own a home, ask them whether their parents went to college or own a home. That's statistically one of the best predictors we know. And so you see generation after generation, and Colleen, representing these 3 real people, is able to sort of unpack generation by generation how the tailwinds accumulated for her, just starting with that GI Bill. And then she does this little comparison of what if I had been Black, and does a side by side, what would have happened at every step generationally, based off of sort of just the basic probabilities of what happened to a white veteran versus a Black veteran. And we are able to fast forward it to today and see how the headwinds and tailwinds of the past are still sitting in the present, and how they're kind of playing back and forth with our individual level biases and our systemic biases. The GI Bill was a systemic bias. Another systemic bias was the fact that most of us did not learn that the GI Bill was for white veterans. We learned it was for veterans. So we're not seeing it for what it is. We're seeing Black people have less education, and we think, oh, I guess they're not that into education, or they're not that motivated, or they come from a community that doesn't value education. And so in that chapter, I think what I was able to do for myself is suddenly see beyond this is just about individuals and their own thoughts. This is about us seeing how these replicate across generations and across systems in ways that are often not visible to us. We often just think that it's happening because individuals are making certain choices.
Yeah. the headwind, tailwind, I think, is a wonderful analogy to that. And I think I want to just make sure that I think I get this, is that even the person that you mentioned, like watching from the window and seeing you struggle into the headwind, but they can't see the wind.
Right.
And I think what is a key piece here is that we haven't, as a white male, in my early 50s, I have probably never had to do that U-turn and face into the wind that many of people of color or women or whatever other those are. And so, as you said, you don't realize that you have a tailwind behind you. You only notice that when you turn around and you face into that headwind. And I think that is really one of the pieces that I took from this, is just that, yeah, we look and we look out, to your point, you're looking out the window and you see these people struggling and you're going, wow, why are they struggling on all these different things? And it's interesting. You talk about the systemic component, and my wife is a real estate agent here in Minneapolis. And one of the things that she's been looking into recently is just in the 30s, 40s and 50s, particularly in Minneapolis, they had put covenants on the lands. And many of those covenants were like, who could potentially, and they stay with the house regardless. They're still actually on the books. They can't be enforced anymore, but they are like, if you are of African descent, of Negro descent is how they were written, or if you are Jewish descent or of Chinese descent, you cannot own this land. And so if you look at the way that Minneapolis is structured, there is one portion of the city where it's highly segregated in North Minneapolis, because they didn't have those covenants, whereas the rest of the city did. And again, I never knew that. Right?
That's so powerful what you've shared, and that it's often referred to as redlining, because it also speaks to whether or not banks would loan money. So even if you would be allowed to buy the house, you couldn't, because you couldn't get a loan for the house.
Yeah.
There's a wonderful segment that I just saw last week. Somebody who had read my book also happened to be watching CBS This Morning, the TV show. And they did a 7-minute segment where the journalist, and I'm so embarrassed, I can't remember his name, but like whoever the anchor guy is on CBS This Morning, Tony, somebody, he went to, I believe, his hometown. And tried to understand, he's white, and he wanted to understand generationally what had happened leading up to him growing up in that town. And he uncovered a lot of what you just described in terms of who could live where, who could get bank loans where. And if you couldn't get a bank loan, that meant you rented. And if it meant you rented, a few things happened. You didn't accumulate wealth, right? Like if you're a homeowner, your home is probably your greatest asset, most valuable asset you own.
Right.
You weren't able to have that wealth gain in value and then be passed on to your children. So generational wealth transfer is affected. It's really profound, and it's in Minneapolis and pretty much every community in America. And a lot of people think it just happened in the South, and that's not true. It's literally all over the country. I will tell you, and I didn't ask for permission to tell the story, so I'm not going to name her, but I have a member of my extended family who is an entrepreneur, and she wanted to start like a pizza parlor or something. And they discovered in the deed that technically, she's Indian American like I am. Technically, she couldn't do so.
Oh my gosh.
And she went and fought it. I don't know if it was ever going to be enforced or not, but she went and had the thing fixed through legal means.
Yeah. Tony Ducopel, is that
that sounds right. Yes. Thank you. Yes.
The magic of Google is really, really good.
Yes.
There you go.
If you need the actual link, I tweeted it at some point.
Oh, fantastic. Okay. Well, we will definitely nab it there. Would you mind if we spent just a couple minutes on your January newsletter, where you talked about the HMMM model. And by the way, just gotta love that when you said, I think you said that this month has been the longest year, or something like. And Kurt and I live in Minneapolis, and after March 25th, when George Floyd was murdered, like we felt like May 25th, but it felt like June was the longest year that we've ever lived, in Minneapolis. So
Yeah.
We totally get that. But tell us a little bit tell the listeners about the HMM, the model, if you would.
Yeah. Well, I'm so excited that you read the newsletter. This is you're referring, of course, to the Dear Good People newsletter, which is free and monthly, and I hope people sign up for it. It's just something where I want to give people a short little 5-minute read every month. Let me see if I can remember. So the idea of the framework, which I spent way too much time trying to come up with, that little acronym. I remember being like on a treadmill, being like, come on, come up with the letters. The idea behind that newsletter was I wanted to offer the tool of thought experiments. The idea of how can we build our muscles of being more inclusive by running these little thought experiments in our head that help us notice things that we might not notice naturally. Because that's part of the problem, right? That is the psychological literacy. That is the headwinds and tailwinds. These are things, there's a lot of stuff we don't notice. So getting better at noticers is really big. So I offered 4 types of thought experiments that fall into these letters, H, M, 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 And then I think I included a little picture of Arsenio Hall for, again, yes. I'm dating my generation here. Yes.
Love it.
In the 90s or 80s, I think Arsenio Hall used to have a late night talk show, and he used to say things that make you say, And so the H stood for humdrum. Like, what if I had a humdrum identity, an identity that didn't stand out? And I use Schitt's Creek as an example. It's a TV show where it's a small town, rural, that has no homophobia at all. It is, you're treated no differently. You have no different issues to navigate if you're straight, if you're queer, if you're gay, if you're bisexual, if you're pansexual. And so this identity that on every other sort of TV show we've ever watched would not be humdrum is incredibly humdrum. And in doing that, you suddenly you can notice how all the ways in which we have created barriers and biases that make it difficult to be that identity. So one thought experiment was assume a certain identity is humdrum, what happens? Another identity was, you may have to help me if I can't remember them. I think there was an M that was my identity.
Mixed up identity and masked identity.
Masked identity. Yeah. And so maybe we shouldn't go through all of them because I feel like I'll ramble for a while. But one of my favorites of those is the masked identity, which speaks to the John Rawls, who's a philosopher, has this really cool thought experiment called Veil of Ignorance. What if you had to make a decision not knowing who you were, and you would eventually know who you were after your decision was made? So, what if you had to decide, who should get the COVID vaccine, not knowing your age, your race, where you live, what your occupation is, what your health conditions are? What if you had to make all those decisions versus if you made that decision knowing exactly who you are? I am a 52-year-old, mostly healthy woman teaching remotely, living in New York. Would I make a different decision with that identity than if I didn't know my identity? And so my little M in the acronym was masked identity for that veil of ignorance. And I think that's a really interesting one for, being able to notice the ways in which, how would you build public transportation if you didn't know where you lived, right? Like if you didn't know if you were going to, how would you build public transportation if you didn't know if you could afford a car? Would it affect sort of the systems you'd put in place? And so these little thought experiments, I think, help us notice ways in which where the headwinds and tailwinds sit, or where our own biases, conscious or unconscious, might sit.
Yeah. So obviously those are thought experiments. And as you talk about this, it's this identifying our own blind spots, which is a very difficult thing to do. Are there other things besides some thought experiments to help us realize some of the things that we might be missing in other things that you've come across? Absolutely. And I say all this with like the idea that I'm constantly discovering more and more about it. So I'm hoping that, like, to me, this is like an Easter egg hunt. It's like they're there. Go find them. This is not like, oh, I hope I don't find them. It's like
it's good news when you do, actually. It means you're closer to, goodish versus good.
Yeah, you're goodish.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, I mean, some of there's from a scientific measure standpoint, there is something called the implicit association test, or the IAT, that's free and anonymous and takes about 15 minutes of uninterrupted time on a computer with a internet connection, a high-speed internet connection. And you can go to implicit.harvard.edu to take that, and you'll get results right after you finish. And it's not a perfect measure. It's not meant to be used for anything high stakes, but it's a good little peek and diagnostic tool that you can ideally take more than once. So that's one place. But you can also do things where you just look at your own, sort of start being an auditor of your own daily patterns. And so, like, for example, what if you looked at whatever you consume, like maybe you're into movies or TV shows or podcasts or books or social media, whatever it is, and do an audit of, the last 10 of those things you consumed, the last 10 folks you followed on Instagram, or the last 10 books you read, and what would you notice? What do you notice about the similarities between the voices that are centered in those last 10? What do you notice about how those voices are similar to your own? And just look for patterns. We were reorganizing our books. I had sort of like, just everything was scattered. You never knew where it was, what room it was in or whatever. And I'm a big book family. I'm a big reader. And so you notice I'm saying that to redeem myself for making so many TV references. All I do is watch TV.
They're all good. They're all good.
Yeah, exactly. So all these books I have. So I was reorganizing the books. I was like, I'm going to do them by genre. I'm going to have like a memoir section, whatever. So I did that, and then I was sort of very proudly looking at this set of shelves with all these memoirs I had read, and then I was like, it's weird. These are like all by men. I'm like,
wow.
It's like, whoa, like there's like a couple that are memoirs written by women about their lives, but really they're by men. And I didn't know that. I didn't realize, and I love memoirs, and I often read them. I often listen to them on Audible, like read by the authors. So I'm literally hearing their voices. And I hadn't noticed I was doing that I was, wow. I was sort of modeling one. Yeah, I didn't realize that. So that was like a good little audit for me. It was unintentional, actually. That one just happened. But for the last year or two, I've very actively been reading memoirs written by women or people who identify as non-binary, and it's been really interesting. I'm so glad I've done that.
Yeah, I like the idea of the audit and being able to look at things, because oftentimes, we go through life and we are on autopilot, as you mentioned earlier, and just taking an accounting of what we've done. It's why I journal every night. And sometimes that is one of those aspects where you look back on the day and there's an element of for me to remember, because 2 weeks ago is like ancient history for me. So I always have something I can go back and go, wait, what did I do then? Okay.
Right.
But there is that element too of putting down those things and having that on paper or in some format where you're going, wow, I do watch a lot, or I read a lot of, memoirs by men, as opposed to, a wide variety, or wow, I'm watching a whole lot more TV. And I always think of myself as a book reader. But if I actually look at my past two months, I spent a whole lot more time watching TV than I did reading books.
That's right. Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that you do that. I think about journaling every night.
Yeah, it's one of those interesting things.
So, Dolly, tell us a little bit about what's on your playlist these days. Do you have a COVID playlist?
Well, I don't have a COVID specific playlist. I'll tell you one thing that's funny is, so I'm teaching on Zoom, for the past year. And one of the things we've been doing is when I do the background survey, which every student submits before the first class, I ask them to all submit one high energy feel good song, whatever they love. It can be any genre, any language, any generation, anything. Clean lyrics only. I learned the hard way. I have to say clean lyrics only. This is a pro tip there. So, but then we with the help of either my kids or my my wonderful teaching assistants, we put together a Spotify playlist of their songs. And that's been a real joy because, first of all, unlike what my teenagers predicted, my late 20, early 30 something students do like some of the songs I like. So there. Because originally I put the playlist together and my kids are really mortified. And so that's been one. So I don't have like specific songs to say, but I will say that has been a real joy to crowdsource songs. The songs that I like to write to when I wrote the Person You Mean to Be, and I'm working on another book right now, is weirdly, it's like Broadway songs, like kind of contemporary musicals like Hamilton and In the Heights and Something Rotten, and just, I don't know if there's some, like Newsies, like there's something about those musicals that always has this kind of like aspirational, they're usually not, every song isn't about like romance. It's more about like, sticking with it and persevering. And I know them all by heart. And so they don't distract me. They feel background. And so I tend to write to those. And recently I got the most lovely little fan mail thing from Alex Lacamoire, who's the musical director of Hamilton and In the Heights. And he had read my book and sent such a lovely note. And he had no idea that I had written the book to his album.
That's fantastic.
That's amazing. And it's interesting because when we've asked this question with we ask everybody pretty much this element. And do you listen to music when you work? And there are people, there are definitely camps, right? People do, I can't work and have music on, and there are people that do, but most often when they're doing like hard work, like writing and things where they have to, it's like, I can listen to music, but it has to be something without lyrics. It has to be more background. And so just the Broadway piece for you, I'm like going, those are the ones that I actually have to get up and sing to. Like you're going on and you like, it's like you know the words, and so that's really fascinating that you can take that to the next level. I love it.
You're right. It is weird because that's one of the things of multitasking is you can't multitask language, two modes of language, right? You can do something with your hands and language at the same time, but you can't do two things with language. So I must be kind of going in and out of hearing the words, but I think that's where it helps that I know them. But there's also those kind of lyrics are, at least for those particular shows, are brilliantly written. There's a lot of wordplay. There's a lot of precision in choice of words. And so I do feel inspired. Like I feel like the craft of writing is something to aspire to.
You have to live up to the quality that you're having in your ears at that moment.
Exactly. It's very inspiring in a way that, a lot of other songs that I also love, Bruno Mars or something, but like that doesn't quite inspire the like attention to word choice in the same
way. No editorial on Bruno Mars there.
No, I love Bruno Mars. Uptown Funk will get me going every day, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, Dolly, thank you so very, very much for being our guest on Behavioral Grooves today.
Thank you for having me. This was so much fun. You all made me laugh and you made me think, and I appreciate both of those things.
Welcome to our grooving session where Tim and I groove on what we learned from our discussion with Dolly, have our free-flowing conversation, and talk about whatever else comes into our good-ish mind.
Good-ishy?
Good-ishy. Good is out there. Good is that really, oh my gosh. And then there's good-ish. You try to be good-ish. And then we just, I think, try to be goodish-ish. Kind of, not quite.
Oh, I see.
Just a little bit above
ish.
Average. Yeah. So just one little bit.
We come from the land of Lake Wobegon, so the whole Lake Wobegon effect certainly applies to us. All of the children are above average here. So if we fall into
not above average, so and we're not children. There you go.
Maybe just by the fact that we live here might put us in that category, but probably not.
Probably. Look at the base rates. Tim. There you go.
So I was thinking that maybe we could frame our grooving session with this episode about Dolly sort of as an opportunity to apply some really great ideas to our lives. Like, what lessons did we learn from our conversation with Dolly? What were the implications? And so I was thinking maybe we think about it in terms of what does she leave us with rather than the way that we approach other grooving sessions. What do you think about that, Kurt?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that is a great idea. No, this is fantastic. I love the concept of looking at this and kind of thinking through what the implications are for each of the different factors that she talked about, because she brought up some really great ideas as we went through those. And if we can apply those to what we do in our everyday life and in our work life, I think we're going to have a better life. So there we go. Let's do it.
So that's a great place to start, with really great ideas. And one of the great ideas that really struck me was taking a step back. This idea that we can examine our life if we pull back just a second and look at it as a journey, right? Not be so instantaneously judgmental that this was good or this was bad. Not instantly categorize it as the simple yes, no, but take a step back every now and then. Be intentional. And I think that we can think about a better life tomorrow or in the next thing, not just criticize, well, it's not good enough or it is good enough, but there could be something better next.
I agree. That stepping back is great. It's hard, right? And the implicit biases that we have that we aren't even aware of that impact how we view the world, the fact that our emotional response is real and it impacts how we then cognitively think about things. So this is a wonderful idea to take a step back. And I think to put this into action, one of the things is to maybe set up these when then statements, right? So when X happens, then I will take 10 seconds to think about this. In other words, use an example, right? When my kids are pushing my buttons and I'm about to explode with them, all right, let's do a count of 10. And then let's think through that count of 10 to take that step back and reframe this for myself. And that's not saying that I'm not ever going to explode at my kids or my dog. My dog is probably even a better example right now these days, right?
Right.
So, all right,
Those
when
teenage years.
he's my dog that chews up every goddamn thing in the house, right? When he does that, instead of just yelling, I need to take a moment and step back and then assess that and look, all right, is this a big deal? Is this not a big deal? Is this something, how do I respond to this? And particularly as I think about responding with the dog, and this is, we're getting into behavioralism here, but the immediate response that you have after a dog does something, he's going to be looking at me and like he chewed up the Tupperware an hour ago. He doesn't know that I'm yelling at him about that because I just found it, right? So he's going to get mixed signals. And so those are those things to be able to maybe put some of those stop gaps in there, because it's too easy in our life just to be on autopilot and just to go through. And it's really hard, even with the best intentions, to say, oh, I'll take a step back, unless we have some simple nomenclatures to kind of make that happen for us.
And that ties into the second concept that I wanted to make sure we cover, and that's this idea of don't hold on quite so tight. I love the way Dolly framed that and the words that she used. Don't hold on quite so tightly. This idea that, okay, we can really lock down on our ideas and we can just say, well, this is the way it is. But she's kind of challenging us to say, don't be so fundamental in it about anything. About actually the world is complex and changing, and there might be new ways of looking at things, even though it's easier to hold on to the status quo. Don't hold on quite so tight to that.
So hold on loosely, but don't let go. I mean, the
38
wisdom
Special.
of 38 Special is just shining through here, right? This idea. You bring up a really good point. And I think, again, from an application perspective of this, it's one of the factors that I loved about Annie Duke. When we think about what Annie Duke was talking about from her perspective of thinking in bets, thinking in probabilities. So there is almost not very many things in this life that I can say with 100% surety, right? There's a lot of things I can say that are 99, 98, 97% sure, but very few that I'm 100% or even 0% sure, right? So this idea of thinking about things and putting probabilities on them has this element that allows us to hold on to things, but maybe not as tightly, that we are able to all right, I get information that is contrary to what I have as a belief. So, all right, am I going to just drop it now? No, but my 98% surety might go down to 96 now. And I think that is a way of being able to apply this in our real world lives.
That's a fantastic way of thinking about it, Kurt. I don't have anything more to add because that is leaving with 38 special was particularly good.
Hey man, I'll hold on loosely. I'm just not going to let go. There we go.
So what about the headwind and tailwind stuff? Like that was a great image, wasn't it? To bring to the table, to think about basically a simple, don't judge a book by its cover kind of a model.
And the story she talked about running down to the fire hydrant and running back. And if you look and go one way, you're not realizing that you have a tailwind behind you. And you're going, oh, this is easy. This is great. It's riding a bike sometimes, like when you're on a slight decline versus a slight incline, enough that you can not, if you look, you can see it. But for the most part, you're not really noticing it. And man, I'm cruising when I'm going down, right? I am just cruising. But even on that little slight incline, all right, at first it doesn't seem too bad, but man, after a certain amount of time, I'm slowing down, I'm getting tired, I'm getting worn out. And I think those analogies to the world are wonderful ones to have, because when we think about these systematic challenges that are out there for people, it's hard to imagine what those are. And that comes back to the fundamental attribution error, right? It's so easy for us to know in our own lives the challenges. Like when we turn around and face that headwind, oh man, I can't run as well because this wind is coming in my face.
But others don't see that.
Yes.
That's the thing. This is there's something happening here, and what it is ain't exactly clear.
Okay, was that Stephen Stills? Who was that? I don't know.
Yeah, Buffalo Springfield. Yeah, very good. Yes.
My God, I'm getting. You're wearing off on me. It's like I'm knowing pre-70s music. It's crazy. So this idea, though, right? This idea of the invisible, and we've talked about this with other guests. This idea that when things are invisible, like the wind pushing up against us, we feel it, but somebody, as Dolly said, somebody looking out their front window can't see the wind unless there's leaves blowing it needs to be really readily apparent. And that's the problem with some of the systematic stuff. That wind isn't a hurricane necessarily. It's not bending trees over. It's not blowing things down the road. If it is, we would go out and we help that, right? That's some of the factors that we've addressed. But now it's just a wind, and we're not seeing that wind, and it's invisible. So how do we make the invisible visible? That's the big question.
Yeah, my personal experience with it, I just have to riff on this. A friend from college who is now an anesthesiologist. His father was a circuit court judge. And his mother was actually named Pediatrician of the Year by Better Homes and Gardens magazine, or Good Housekeeping or something in the 70s. Amazing family, really well off, well to do. Dan was black, and he got pulled over by the cops on a regular basis.
Yeah.
For just because of the color of his skin. And he said he remembers very clearly the day that his dad sat down and had the talk with him. This is going to happen to you. I was like, holy Hannah. That never happened to me. I never got pulled over because of the color of my skin.
Yeah.
But Danny got pulled over.
And those are things that, again, 99.9% of the time get brushed off. Nothing happens out of it. You might get a ticket. You might not. You go with a warning. But they happen. And it's only those 0.01 times where it becomes visible because something negative, really bad happens out of this. Right. But for people on the outside, I mean, not for the people that it's happening to, that they're feeling it every day.
Yeah.
So those are the factors that, again, how do we take what is invisible in our lives and not apply this fundamental attribution error that, I'm having a hard time because the wind is blowing in my face, but they're having a hard time because they're just lazy. And it's easy to do that without being able to be in their shoes and to feel the wind that is up against them. And that's tough.
Dolly teed up a couple of pretty specific things, actually, that we can do. And to kind of go with where you were headed there, Kurt, maybe we could start with that a thought experiment on the veil of ignorance idea. This is a step back kind of thing, right? But if we use a thought experiment to say, what would it be like? What would it be like if I wasn't born who I am?
Mm.
What if I don't know what neighborhood I grew up in, or where my family is, or who my siblings are? What if I don't know all that? How would I design a police force?
Yeah. If I didn't know what color my skin was, right? Mm-hmm. And how am I going to design a police force? How am I going to design a political system? How am I going to design a workplace? All of these factors that come in that have some of these aspects. And if all right, let's play a game where there's a bowl full of these different balls in them, and you reach your hand in and pull one out, and it says, oh, I am a female of Spanish descent, and 33 years old with 2 kids, and etc. Okay, so how does that work in the design of my workplace versus I'm a 52-year-old white male, that has a PhD? Very different approaches to what then I want in a workplace. And those are the things I think it's a really great thought experiment. She did a neat one in one of her articles about just thinking about even some of the things that are going on. What would have happened if George Floyd would have been white? What would have happened if the people storming the Capitol on January 6th would have been black and brown and wearing turbans and having long beards? Really. And the hard part about this is it's really hard for us to get out of our own self.
It is
We've
hard.
only experience the world through our own being, but these thought experiments can at least help in trying to get us to a better realization of what that is.
Yeah. What else can we do? What other actions could we take?
So she talked about the IAT, and I think that's a fantastic thing, and we can all take it, and we can take it multiple times. And again, it's a snapshot, and it's this idea that, hey, this will change. It will adjust, particularly if we focus in on it. But let's at least understand where some of these underlying implicit biases that I have, that they're real and they're there, and they're impacting the world in the way that I see it. And so if we understand that, it doesn't necessarily change, but it gives us a better starting point to be able to make some of the changes that are necessary in our lives.
Yeah. And we'll link to that in the show notes. You can take it for free. It's out on the Harvard website. Because they actually sponsor it because of Mazrin Banaji.
There's one more thing, Tim. One more thing. Well, actually, there's a lot more things, but there's one more thing that I know we want to talk about, which is one of my favorite ideas of this, which is
self-audit.
Yeah.
Do the damn self-audit. Look at your library. Look at the books that you've got. Look at the magazines that you're getting in your house. Look at the TV programs that you're watching. Look at the friends that you have in your life. Who do you spend time with? What do you talk about? Audit a little bit of your life and take an inventory of what you're doing with it. I think that that's a really important thing.
One of my friends, Brock Ray, who he's been to a couple of the meetups and different pieces. He brought up this idea when we were thinking about just like how do we help out the community that's around here, particularly with everything that has been going on with George Floyd and the Lake Street that got had the riots and burned down. And one of the things he said, I was talking with a person of color, and they said, look, you got to show up where we are. You can't expect us to always come to you. You have to show up where we are. And so to your point of doing this audit, when was the last time that I went down and bought something at one of these stores that's on Lake Street that is in this area that had been burned out and rioted in various different pieces? How many times have I gone into a predominantly black or brown Latino? I live in a predominantly Latino area, but when do we do that? How often are you even there? How are you showing up into the world? And if you're not in those locations, if you're not reading books by them, if you're not watching television shows that talk about them, that doesn't allow you to sit in their world and to be able to see the winds that they're facing. Because if you look at it from the outside, from far away, you're not going to be able to see that wind. And it's only by being there. It's only by taking part in what they're seeing and what they're feeling and what they're reading and experiencing can we ever feel that wind on our own face.
So have you done an audit? Have you looked at your own bookshelf?
My bookshelf is white. It is very, very white. I will say this. My bookshelf is a mix between male and female, at least. But again, then I'm like going, yeah, but there's not any non-binary, authors in here. There's not any transgender authors in here as far as, I know. And I haven't necessarily searched out those. And to a degree, there's a part of all of us where it's like, there's so much stuff going on in our world. Do I have the effort or the energy to really go out and look and try to find these other viewpoints to incorporate them in? Because it's so much easier just to go and watch the shows that I think are going to be interesting. And I agree with that to a degree. But I think there's also an effort that we need to make to get us into the mindset. If we want to be goodish, right? If we want to be a little bit better than we were yesterday. And I think that's a key piece. So
Rohit Bhargava, just one more thing about this. Rohit Bhargava talked about this idea of he subscribes to Teen Vogue to get him outside of his normal thing. So he built a little routine. He just made a little pre-commitment to say, this is going to come into my house and I'm going to see what articles are popular with teen girls. I'm going to get outside of my 40 plus year old Indian American dude thing and get something different going. And I think that that's pretty cool to do that. So there are great ways of doing it just with small devices. You don't have to work super hard at it, but it's just good to make a little bit of effort and be intentional.
Well, and even thinking about this from a political perspective, right? You can subscribe to newsletters that might be from a different perspective than yours. And and yes, you may feel like some wanting to throw up when you read some of those, but it also allows you this opportunity to at least understand what they're hearing.
Yeah.
The conversations that that group is having. And I think we would be a much better country, a much better world if we were able to at least see that and again understand as much as we can understand other people's perspectives. So
I have been more critical of CNN after watching more Fox News because of the spin aspect that is so evident in both of those organizations, right?
No,
it's just easier to see.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So this week, we'd love it if you give just one of these ideas a try. Actually, try two. Try three. Come on, people. You can do more than one. But put these concepts to use in your life, and then send us a note. I think we're really going to try to. We want to get people's input. We want to hear what you have to say about this. This is the Tim and Kurt show, but man, we really think that we want your perspective, your viewpoint. Are we off the rail? Are we? What are the wins that you're facing? So let's hear that. So send us, you can always reach us at Twitter. I'm at Motivation Guru, and Mr. Houlihan here is at T Houlihan. That is THOULIHAN. And we'd love to hear from you and hear what you're up to, hear if you applied any of this and if it worked and what you're struggling with. Who should we have on the show? Who do you want to hear from? What do you want us to be talking about? Do you like this grooving session, or should we just end with the interview? Because damn, I'm tired of you talking, Kurt. All right. So let's start a conversation. And with that, we thank you for listening, and we hope that this week you go out and find your groove.